Brilliant. So thank you so much for joining the Towards Net Zero Commodity Masterclass series. I'm absolutely thrilled that today's session is hosted by a fabulous team of experts at Ahold Delhaize and that we're focusing in on coffee. So as with all of the sessions, if you're joining us here live today or you're going to be listening to this in the future, we do have a brilliant team that are really open to engaging with you, getting into kind of an interactive discussion. So whether you're live today or you're going to be looking to this in the future, just reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat and at the end of the deck, and we can make sure that we follow up with you. So what are you going to expect on today's session? Obviously, we'll give you an introduction into what coffee means at Ahold Delhaize, a kind of an overview and a context and some market specificities on coffee. What we're really going to then dive into is those case studies and those kind of levers that the team at Ahold Delhaize have unlocked and used to decarbonize. And then, yes, of course, kind of questions and answers and what's coming next in this overarching series, which is part of an ambition at the Consumer Goods Forum to accelerate that decarbonisation and those levers and solutions that we're uncovering. And what we will do in January as well, what's been really interesting as we kind of navigate through different commodities, we're seeing patterns in terms of questions and challenges and potential solutions that we might be able to collaborate on in 2025 with the Towards Net Zero Coalition of Action. So who do we have? I spoke about a great group of experts, and here they are. So I am very lucky to get to work with these people on a regular basis. So Grant, Martin, and Sven, a huge thank you for joining us today. You can see here their roles within Ahold Delhaize, and I will just say that Grant, on top of his day job, is also the global co-chair of our Towards Net Zero Coalition of Action. Then he'll be followed by Martin, who'll give you an overview of the context and the specificities around coffee, and we'll deep dive into the details with Sven. Please use this brilliant team to think about your questions, to share challenges with them. They're up for it. And let's get really into hopefully some great solutions that you can take back to your organization or share with your colleagues after today's call. So with that, buckle up. This is going to be a great session, and I will hand over to Grant to kick us off. Grant, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Hey, being one of the co-chairs of the Toward Net Zero Coalition is part of my day job. That's not on top of my day job, huh? This is important stuff. And thank you all for being on this call. Yes, this is one of a series of master classes. Do go to the CGF website. I navigated to it. I found the recordings of our prior sessions on dairy with Bell Group and Danone, on potatoes, PepsiCo, and cocoa with Mondelez. Really awesome sessions. I hope this one is equally as awesome. So do enjoy it. If you're not familiar with Ahold Delhaize, let me just quickly explain who we are. We are a group of local grocery, retail, and e-commerce retail brands around the world. We have 16 local brands. One of those brands here in the Netherlands is called Albert Heijn. And like all commodities that are presented and discussed in this series, coffee is clearly an important product for Albert Heijn. And we've been roasting coffee since the late 1900s, so quite a long time. And we do that through our own roastery called the Ahold Delhaize Coffee Company, which is one of the oldest and longest and largest roasteries across Europe. Ahold Delhaize, we also have net zero targets that are really important. The activities that we conduct through ADCC, the Ahold Delhaize Coffee Company, contribute to our footprint. They also contribute to the suite of solutions that we can implement to decarbonize. So we're very happy to take you through some of the activities and thinking that we're looking at as we decarbonize, but also maybe even the more important bits are looking at how retailers and suppliers in general can also contribute to that as well. So one final thing before I hand over to Marta and Sven is that, yes, this is a conversation focusing on decarbonization, but it would be a missed opportunity if I also didn't acknowledge that the coffee industry is estimated to support the livelihoods of over 12 million families, farmer families around the world. Yeah. And yes, this is a presentation that covers levers to decarbonize and reduce emissions, but there's lots of improvement as well, or opportunity for improvement as well, on social conditions, the potential to directly contribute to fulfilling of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, like one, no poverty, and eight, decent work and economic growth. So we cannot forget the social opportunity as well. So without any further ado, let's get into the topic of decarbonization of coffee, and I'll hand it over to Marta and Sven to take us through the content. Thanks, gents.
All right, thank you very much, Grant. All right, so I have the honor to take you through a bit of the context of the coffee category for us. As you might know, this next slide, the coffee producing world is quite scattered and fragmented. While we produce roughly 10 million tons with a market value of almost 140 billion euros, dollars. Sorry. Most of it, 73%, is centered around only 5 countries, mainly Brazil and Vietnam, and then the rest will get much smaller as we go further into the long tail. The coffee market is characterized by recurrent supply-demand imbalances. So there's a lot of price fluctuations over the decades. However, we see now, in the, let's say, the most recent years, that prices are steadily rising. Last year, there was an absolute price record in the coffee market, and that was mainly contributable to to climate change and the recurrent droughts that farmers are facing. So this is really an actual topic. Not only are we helping the world, but we are really helping farmers in tackling those climate problems. Innovation and new technologies will be crucial in tackling that. And well, we'll get to more on that later if we get to the next slide, which is a bit of a, let's say, an overview slide just to explain where coffee is produced. So in the global south, main producer is Brazil, and then it's usually shipped to the what we call the developed economies in the global north. Europe, Japan is also a big drinker of coffee, and they account for more than half of coffee consumption. The consumption per capita in those countries is about 7 kilograms per year, while in the average in the world it's only about 2. So, and even then, the expected consumption is to rise with 1 to 2% each year. So we can expect further developments there. If we go to the next slide, we dive more into coffee and its carbon footprint itself. Please note on this slide that this captures the emissions from farm to shelf, not all the way into the brewing at home and disposal of coffee grounds. What you can see here is that farming and green coffee production is, of course, by far the biggest factor. And here, even we have taken out land use change, so that's not part of farming and green coffee production. So in farming, it's safe to say that coffee is a very nitrogen-dependent crop. So a lot of that farming and green coffee production footprint is due to the inputs of fertilizer and farming practices. Part of that is the milling process, by the way, that is part of the green coffee production, which also produces a lot of methane, which is not directly part of this presentation, but it's also one production process that is important to acknowledge. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. I won't go too long on this one. maybe good to mention that what on the I went a bit too fast. The what you see is the roasting activities on the left side were only 7%. So what we need to tackle as ADCC and as Ahold, as the mother company of that, is the scope 3. Now, what does this scope 3 contain of? The main difference is between smallholder farms and big plantations. There are, let's say, over 80% of coffee production is done by smallholder farms, and 60% of the global supply is done by smallholder farms. And the stereotype of the farmer here that you see here with nurturing shade-grown coffee plants on steep slopes of lush tropical highlands, that's a nice picture, but to be honest, the reality is more like the picture on the right, where you see coffee plantations growing in size, and monocropping is a big part of that to make it more efficient. But of course, it also has, besides the land use change involved in that, has also impact on biodiversity and also on the livelihoods of those smallholder farmers who then are no longer part of the market. And examples, you see a lot of smallholders for example, in Africa, you see a lot of smallholder farmers. Ethiopia is one of them, while we see more bigger farms in South America and mainly Brazil. Next slide, please. So, I mean, there are a lot of challenges, and also you see in the other master classes on commodities, you see that there are a lot of challenges to tackle. We focused on these 5 because they are the most prominent in the coffee chains. And even then we see that, so while we have more influence on the first 3, that the supplier landscape and the cost of financing, the other 2 are very important, but very hard to influence for us as a downstream roaster or even by traders. And it's mainly about financing. And what we see is that the current coffee production model, which focuses on cost reduction, profit maximization, that contradicts the sustainability commitments. So we need to find a way of, I won't say refinancing, but to get financial incentives to the farmers where they can actually make a difference on their farm in how they produce the coffee. Let's see. Well, of course, what you see here is that the one thing to mention on the 5th is that the hesitation to adopt new techniques within the farmer community that is goes to how these farmers are organized. So usually you need to speak to certain people in the community and have them on your side, and then changes can be implemented throughout the community. So it takes a lot of time and effort to really make a change in those farmer communities. So these are the challenges that we're facing, and I will hand over to my colleague Sven now, who will talk more about how we see the solutions as Ahold as a coffee company. Sven, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Well, that's the context Martin just perfectly described. But we are a roastery, so we buy the coffee and we sell it onwards. So let's go to the next slide, please. So what levers do we have to make our supply chain more CO2 friendly? Let's put it like that. Well, several, of course, in our own scope 1 and 2. We'll come back to that later, but as Martin pointed out already, most of our CO2 emissions is in our supply chain. It's on farm level. So we have 2 levers, main levers that we could try to influence. It's the on farm level, what we call the regenerative agriculture. As we saw already, this archetype of the Ethiopian farmer. That would be the perfect world if we could have it in a regenerative way, so not a monocropping culture, but we can have low carbon farming practices meanwhile preserving the social conditions and the productivity so we can make good profit out of it, that would be perfect. And then you can reach an estimated 50% reduction in your CO2 emissions. But as said, practice now regenerative agriculture. It's the romantic view on the smallholder farmer, which is in other topics than greenhouse gas emissions, not always the best way forward. Let's take the next slide. What we'd like to share with you is what we've done since climate change is also one of our top priorities, and let's share with you in all transparency what we did and what we couldn't do, or which setbacks we faced. So on the next slide, you see here the graph of our emissions that we track. It's CO2 equivalents. Most of it is also CO2 emissions. And what we did, we tracked it via the one of the tools that we have. It's externally validated tool. It's SBTI. So I think it's a very thorough calculation method. And we calculated the CO2 equivalents per ton of finished product, so on the roasted coffee. What you see in the dotted line is our target footprint, which is aligned with the Delhaize overall CO2 commitment. It's based on the Paris Agreement, obviously, which runs through 45% of CO2 reductions from 2018 till 2030. So in the green line, you see what we have achieved so far, year by year, and on the yellow line, what we have forecasted. So I will show you four topics. Three of them are actions, which helped us to make the CO2 reductions. But I will also want to share with you something that what was a barrier. As you can see, in 2020, the line went up. And of course, the obvious question on your end could be, why? Because in our world, we always want to see reductions, right? So going through the next slide. So the 4 blocks I want to share with you. The one achievement we had was, I would say, looking backwards, the low-hanging fruit of the renewable energy, which is the scope 1 and 2. So we run a roastery. We use a fair amount of energy, let's put it mildly, to roast the coffee, but also to run the packaging lines. So it's not only natural gas, it's also electricity. So what we did, we introduced renewable energy, which is wind-generated electricity. And on the natural gas, we could still use back then the compensation. And we put solar panels on our roof. But even though we have a large roof here in the roastery in the Netherlands, still it only holds for 5% of the total electricity that we use. Are we done? No, we're not. Because if we look further, we acknowledge that compensation was good. CO2 compensation was good in 2019, but it won't be in 2030. So what we will do, we will reduce our natural gas use. For example, we've now a new roastery, which saves up to 50% of the natural gas. But we have 2 roasteries, roastery 1 and roastery 2 on the same premise here in the Netherlands. So we can benchmark them. We can learn from roaster 1 why a batch of coffee uses less natural gas than roaster 2. So we can learn, we can analyze, and we can reduce further. If we have reached a fair amount of natural gas reduction, it's a time we can step into a new roasting technique, which could be hydrogen or it could be electricity. Time will tell. But first, we have to become more efficient on our natural gas. Is that easy? No, it's not, because it's a new technique. Coffee is produced in batches. So every 500 gram of coffee that you will roast, you have to heat up till 250 degrees Celsius, and then cool it down after 5 minutes till, let's say, 20 degrees Celsius. And you have to do it every 5-6 minutes. So you can imagine it takes lots of energy, and we still, if we can find a way to use the cooling down process, we can save lots of energy. Hydrogen, it's not available yet, at least not in this part of the Netherlands. There's no infrastructure yet, and there's no pipelines or enough electricity to generate this hydrogen. And same holds for electricity. There's not technically, we don't have enough electricity in this part of the Netherlands to step over to electricity. So we're looking into it, but it's a multiple year investment, and it has its technical challenges. But we are quite confident we can reach it in, let's say, 1 decade. So going back to the next slide, please. What we did, we saw already that the greenhouse gas emissions are in the farming stage. Part of it is because of land use change. Our intervention in there was to start only sourcing Rainforest Alliance certified coffees. Because the rainforest, it secures us from a supply chain that is not from deforested areas. So in the Rainforest Alliance standard, and it's checked upon by the third-party auditor, you can't produce coffee if it's from areas deforested before 2014. And in our calculations, that has led to a big CO2 reduction. I would say it's easy to start with because you can simply join the Rainforest Alliance program. However, it comes with costs, and it's not only, I would say, is it expensive? Yes, it leads to a price increase, but we are lucky to have customers, the retailers of Delhaize, but also other retailers that we supply coffee with, that found this very important, not only because of the CO2 reduction it brings, but also because of the social aspects or the economic aspects, the farming practices that will improve because of the Rainforest Alliance certification. So it's a holistic approach. Are we done? No, we're not, because certification doesn't lead to the perfect farming model. We acknowledge that, as does the Rainforest Alliance certification. So the next step would be something in the area of the regenerative agriculture that we already discussed. That's much harder because it requires a new sourcing model, at least for us. If we want to invest in regenerative agriculture, we should start working with long-term sourcing commitment towards the coffee producer, so the farmer. It's not enough to source only from a trader for multiple years. We have to go through a long-term sourcing commitment with a coffee farmer, which brings some financial challenges as well. But we think it's the way forward. We're not there yet, but we are discussing this with our customers. If we can invest in origin ourselves, let's say in a Brazilian farmer or in Africa, we should find a way to overcome the idea that we only source, let's say, 1% of all the coffee of that specific farm. So how can we invest in a farm even though we only source 1 to 5% of the coffee year by year? So that's a new investment model. But we do have some examples. We look at, let's say, a front runner like Nespresso, which we think is a very good example in this field. And we try to learn from them. They also promote learnings. And in the end, it would be great if you could be the first retail supplying coffee roaster to really invest in regenerative agriculture. Let's go to action 3. Another example that we did. that was in the yellow part of the graph I just showed you. It's more in the future. It's not the biggest part that we have in CO2, but it's a very visible part, and it's one that is cheered upon by our customers as well. We should reduce the plastic, the packaging as such of the coffee that we supply our retailers with. So it should be thinner, it should be easier to recycle, and it should be in the end, we should make the packaging material out of the previous packaging. So reuse of packaging material. That requires quite some investments in our packaging lines, but we can do it. But to start reusing the packaging material even goes a step further. Then we also need to find an alignment with the let's say the waste chain after our consumers have thrown away the packaging somehow. So that's not an easy part, but that's something we can cooperate with other producers of packaging material, not limited to coffee, but also to some other categories that we have on our shelves in our shops. Two examples that we can easily achieve. We also produce capsules, Nespresso type of capsules. If we can use recycled aluminum instead of the virgin material, that's now the default in our sector, we could reduce the CO2 emissions of the capsules by, I think, 80%. So that's quite an easy step to take as the first one. So it's not all only moonshine. If you go through the next slide, you'll see Grant is laughing. I'm not sure if moonshine is a good English, but you know what I mean. Some setbacks we faced as well. When we drafted the graph I just showed you in the previous slides, everything went well, but along when the time passed by, our customers also asked us to introduce capsules, the Nespresso type of capsules, the Dolce Gusto type of capsules, and that comes with quite some CO2 intensity. So in our plans to reach the 45% CO2 reduction in 2030, we saw a step up in our CO2 emissions, and we had to mitigate them. So to take extra additional actions on other topics that we could influence to overcome the commercial needs that we also had to introduce to quite CO2 intensive packaging lines. And that happens if you work on every topic into sustainability. It's a straight line towards the end goal. So sometimes you have to face some, let's say, disappointments, but as long as you keep an eye on the 2030 goal and you see that you're still following the line that you set together, I'm convinced that we can make it. So that's I think that was the last slide, if I'm correct. Okay, check please. Oh no, of course, sorry. Some learnings, an overview of the learnings. This is my favorite part. So the organizers were asking if you would generalize the learnings that you had so far. What can you recommend to the audience? And I think what we've learned, you need to set a baseline for more sustainable coffee, because you have to define what you regard as next steps, what you target, how do you measure. How we did it, we used the third-party certifications like the Rainforest Alliance in our case, but also something like Fair Trade or a Trader Sustainability Program, which you have several of, are easy baseline standards. So if you ask your supplier, and our coffee supplier, to deliver more sustainable coffees, and you ask them to do it according one of those certifications or sustainability programs, you assess them yourself. I think that's an doable step you can take. initiate yourself. So secondly, find ways, that's where we are, find ways to invest in regenerative agriculture. You can do it via the already mentioned sustainability programs, but you have to invest yourself to understand your supply chain yourself. It's not good enough anymore in the near future simply to ask your tier one supplier, which in our case is often a trading house, to invest in sustainability. You have to do it yourself finally, but in partnership with your trader or with sustainability programs. And thirdly, what we could recommend is we already mentioned, don't think of sustainability as a linear way to achieve it. It's a difficult pathway. It's an exciting pathway, but just set a long-term target goal and explain to the, let's say, more finance-based colleagues that you probably have around you that it goes up and down. But in the end, in 2030, you will reach your goal. And of course, don't do it yourself as a company. Always try to find collaborations with your supply chain, or like the Consumer Goods Forum is now doing with your, let's say, competitors or colleagues. Because the next steps in my 3 actions I showed you, those are the most difficult ones. The low-hanging fruits is often a matter of efforts and some investments. You can do it yourself, but next steps, yes, we have to do it together.
Great.
There you go. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sven and Martin. Just Grant, if you wouldn't mind, before we get into the Q&A, just that kind of last call to action on collaboration, maybe I'll just let you say a couple of words on that and give people some time to think about their questions for the Q&A session. So Grant, I'll let you just wrap it up, and then do think of your questions, and you can pop them in the chat, or you can come off mute and come on camera if you wish to or not, and we'll get into the Q&A session. So thank you very much. Grant, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, thanks, Sharon. And Sven, Marta, thanks very much. I felt this was a very balanced discussion. It's not all positives, we can do this, but sometimes we have to do things, or we feel like we need to do things that make you take a step backwards. So thank you for being balanced in your sharing. Before we open it up to Q&A, just to summarize some of the things that I heard, and maybe this helps to stimulate some question generation in your minds, is, we heard about the challenges of the industry with increased demand, and that being balanced with our changing climate. We heard about the challenges with energy consumption and roasting in general. We heard about the pros and the incompleteness of certification. We heard about the benefits of long-term commitments direct with the farmer. And yes, that sounds nice, but that takes time to develop and a different way of working. We heard about the importance of being inspired what other companies are doing, right? Another great example, Sven, that you shared with Nespresso. We spoke about the challenges of packaging and reuse and monomaterials. We spoke about the challenges with convenience, right? Customers love things that are convenient, and sometimes that has a negative effect on emissions. And then lastly, we spoke about the importance of developing mutual trust and transparency. So just some points that I took away from the conversation. And if I can use that as a jumping off platform to open it up to Q&A, and Sharon, as you suggested, please feel free to type your questions in the chat, or if you're comfortable enough to come off mute, turn on camera, and you can ask your questions directly yourself. Either way, we are here for you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for that transparency as well. It's not like a linear path, exactly like you said. That kind of, it does take a specific mindset and kind of long-term thinking. So thank you for sharing the solutions, but also the reality is that it doesn't all work. So now, if I can just start with a first question while the audience, you're thinking about your what you'd like to ask Martin, Sven, and And Grant, so we've done a few of these now commodity masterclasses, and we're starting to see and understand some of the learnings that hopefully we'll be able to act upon in 2025. You know, is coffee very different from other commodities, or could one of you comment on the differences that you see with coffee, or even some of the similarities that you might see with other commodities?
Yeah, I think I can speak that a little bit because I also manage the other commodities. Well, that we have dubbed the critical commodities for us, so like soy and palm oil, and there are differences, of course, based on the supplier landscape. But in the end, as a retailer, what you can do is you have to manage. You oversee the risks in all of them, and the similarities you see is that indeed it all goes back to the farms in the end. I think we see in most commodities that the main emission factors are at farm level. And we see that those are people who are dependent on their farm to survive and provide food for their families. So they are reluctant to make a change if they don't see the benefit immediately. And that's, I think it was also clear in our story, in this sense, examples. Those are the people that you need to reach with all your good intentions, and how we have to find a way, and hopefully the consumer goods firm can help in that as well. Together, how can we do that? And that's a similarity that we see across all the commodities. Yes.
A difference there is as well, Sharon. It's like coffee is a luxury product. So if we can't improve sustainability in coffee, then how can we ever achieve a more sustainable rice production, or let's say the commodities that are really make a difference in the world? I like coffee, don't get me wrong. I need it every day, of course. But if we don't learn for coffee, we don't get it there properly produced, then we'll never manage to do it in the other even more important commodities.
Thank you for that. And you just, Sven, you made me think about scale and kind of what we can do with the Consumer Goods Forum, and kind of the actions that you've shared, in particular, number 2, on kind of the different actors along the supply chain and the need to work together. And one of the solutions was regenerative agriculture. It's come up in basically in each and every session, but scaling it and how do we actually scale it is something that all of the companies that have leaned in have shared as a challenge. Could you build on just scaling regenerative agriculture and getting all the actors to move along the value chain?
Yeah, definitely. We see already examples in Vietnam, for example, also in an important coffee country where it's smallholder farming. But most of the farmers do multi-cropping. They have fruits like the durian fruit, but they also have pepper and they have coffee, and they are much more resilient to price differences, volatility in price, or even into I say pests that sometimes occur in coffee, but can't or in fruits or in the others. But in a multi-cropping system, you're more resilient to those. So in that case, it's collaboration between, in my example, of fruit, coffee, and pepper.
Great, thank you. And it also got me thinking of, you're the first retailer to present in this commodity masterclass series. And today you're focused on coffee, but Martin, you mentioned obviously multiple commodities. And coming from a retailer perspective, does that give you a different kind of viewpoint, or how you put your focus or your risk opportunity assessment on coffee vis-a-vis others? Or from a retailer perspective, for there's a number of other retailers listening in, any insights that you can share to build on that perspective from a retailer?
Yes, I think I can. So I think it starts with doing a proper risk assessment across your value chains, plural, and then determining what one, of course, is what are the main problems. So CO2 is one of them, but I mean, there's also other impacts that you can have on, say, on nature, on water, on well, biodiversity, you name it. And then across those risk categories, you classify, okay, what are the most important commodities or products contributing to that, and then based on the big risk, you see, okay, how can we mitigate them, and then there's a remaining risk, and you need to address that again. And I mean, it's the whole due diligence cycle that is, of course, also well documented. But you have to do it across, well, everything that you do. So that's a huge undertaking, and it's an investment in time. But it's as soon as it becomes part of your process of your and then, well, it's the base of moving forward. Yeah.
And what the retailer also does, or at least Delhaize does, is then organize the dialogue in one category. For example, Ahold invited all the coffee suppliers they have in the Netherlands and Belgium for a roundtable conversation and start to learn from each other. But also lay down the expectations that Ahold Delhaize has into the coffee category. And that goes from private label to A-brands.
Yeah, we've heard that in our work from the Towards Net Zero Coalition, just the stakeholder engagement, how important it is having the targets, but obviously the clear expectations of your supplier community and how you can support each other on the journey. Vincent was asking, Martin, you did mention kind of the risk assessments, but just the reality now of climate, weather, all of the things that we've seen, all of us are living as humans on this planet. And he mentions why we have CSRD, double materiality assessment, that's been put into place with just the reality of climate change. How do you account for these risks and keeping your own global supply chain sustainably resilient? So it's a big question. Yeah, I don't know who wants to take that one.
Maybe, Grant, if I can ask you, because you have an even bigger overview than I do, because you also have climate in your remit.
Yeah, sure. Big question, this one. Big question. And as a retailer, you look at the list of high impact commodities of SBTN, like we have all of them in our supply chain, right? Pretty much. And like the challenge for us is that we always have to remember that we can't boil the ocean or shouldn't boil the ocean. And you have to understand where are your biggest risks, dependencies, impacts, and leverage, right? So we're using, let's say, legislation, CSRD, the results of our double materiality assessment to set in motion more, let's say, science-based thinking around where we should focus to make a positive impact on nature. And then also where can those activities provide a dual benefit, making a positive impact on climate, or a triple benefit, making a positive impact on social and local communities. Yeah, this is this is kind of a repeating thing that needs to happen arguably every year. Yeah, so we're certainly doing this right now. I would say in sometime in 2025, we'll release some new thinking and activities around this, but this is definitely the time for rethinking, let's say, a historical approach on critical commodities with a primary focus on certifications.
Great, and I think thank you, Grant, and kind of if we think about wrapping it up now, and that reality and how things have changed, a kind of call to action that you might give to the community that's listening to this. They've listened to coffee, but kind of we've gone a lot broader on just the realities of climate change. A call to action to retailers, manufacturers listening to this session, yeah, to kind of wrap up today's masterclass. Any final words? apart from collaborate.
Well, yeah, I was just going to go right there. Yeah, this is
Yeah.
not a job for one person, one role to do, right? This takes your sustainability teams, your procurement teams, your commodity expert teams to come together to figure out how can we work with other companies, how can we look at this challenge from a landscape perspective, how can we learn from others. Yeah, it's just the call to arms here is just don't lose the momentum. Like, don't get hung up on these steps backwards that you ultimately will have to take. Yeah. How can we help each other? I'll leave it with that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we have, of course, a number of sessions that are coming up. We'll kickstart the new year, most likely with rice, followed by wheat. So I've popped the link in the chat. So don't hesitate to listen back to this if you have other questions that come to mind. When you're listening again, or you share it with some of your colleagues, I'll just pop my email in. It's s.bly@theconsumergoodsforum.com. Would love to hear from you. A huge thank you, Martin, Sven, and Grant, for sharing all of the insights today. And as I said, in January, we'll be sharing a recap with all of our members of what we learned, the commonalities between the different sessions. And yeah, just all the thank yous coming through in the chat. Really appreciate your time, and don't hesitate to follow up. And again, thank you to the team at Ahold Delhaize, and have a great rest of your day or evening or morning, wherever you're listening in. Thank you, everyone.